Maya Johnson woke up early that morning, just like she did every other day. The sun had barely begun to peek over the horizon, casting a soft, golden glow through the thin curtains of her small apartment. She stretched and glanced at the clock on the wall. 5:45 a.m. Her 2 young children were still asleep in their room, wrapped up snugly in their blankets. Maya smiled faintly as she thought about how much they depended on her. It wasn't always easy being both mother and father to them, but she wouldn't trade this life for anything else. After slipping into her work uniform, a simple pair of jeans and a faded t-shirt, she made herself a quick breakfast of toast and coffee. As she ate, she reviewed her schedule for the day. Today she had 3 houses to clean, starting with an upscale neighborhood she'd never been to before. A new client had hired her through a referral, and Maya was determined to make a good impression. She prided herself on her attention to detail, making sure each home she cleaned sparkled by the time she left. Word of mouth was everything in her line of work, and she couldn't afford to let anyone down. By 7:30 a.m., Maya loaded her cleaning supplies into the trunk of her old sedan. Buckets, mops, sponges, disinfectants, all neatly arranged despite the car's worn interior. With one last glance at her sleeping kids, she kissed her hand and pressed it against their bedroom door before heading out. The drive took longer than expected because traffic was heavier than usual, but Maya didn't mind. She used the time to mentally prepare herself for the long day ahead. Cleaning homes wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and that was all that mattered. When she finally arrived at the address, Maya couldn't help but marvel at the neighborhood. Wide streets lined with perfectly trimmed hedges led to massive houses with sprawling lawns. Luxury SUVs and sports cars sat parked in pristine driveways. This place was worlds apart from the cramped apartment complex where she lived. Still, Maya felt no envy, just determination. She reminded herself why she was here, to provide for her family. The house she was assigned to clean was particularly impressive. It was a 2-story colonial-style home painted in crisp white with black shutters framing the windows. Flower beds bloomed vibrantly around the front porch, adding a splash of color to the otherwise pristine exterior. Maya stepped out of her car, grabbing her bucket and a few cleaning tools. She locked the door behind her, double-checking to ensure her belongings were secure. Even though the area seemed safe, she knew better than to take chances. As she walked toward the house, she noticed a police cruiser slowly cruising down the street. At first, she paid it no mind. Cops patrolling quiet neighborhoods weren't uncommon. But then the car slowed even further, stopping just a few feet away from her. The window rolled down, revealing a stern-faced officer wearing mirrored sunglasses. His nameplate read Harris. Officer Greg Harris looked her up and down, his expression unreadable behind those reflective lenses. "What are you doing here?" he asked abruptly, his voice sharp and accusatory. Maya froze for a moment, caught off guard by his tone. "I'm here to clean," she replied calmly, holding up her bucket as if it were proof. "I've got an appointment with the homeowner." Harris narrowed his eyes, leaning slightly out of the window. "Appointment? What's your name?" "Maya Johnson," she said confidently, trying not to let his hostility rattle her. "I was hired by Mrs. Carter. She should be back later today." Instead of softening, Harris's demeanor grew colder. He opened the car door and stepped out, towering over her. "You expect me to believe that? Do you even know who lives here?" Maya swallowed hard but kept her composure. "Yes, sir. I spoke with Mrs. Carter yesterday. She gave me the address and instructions." Harris ignored her explanation, taking a step closer. "This neighborhood has had some issues lately. Break-ins, suspicious activity. People don't want strangers snooping around." "I'm not a stranger," Maya insisted, clutching her bucket tighter. "I'm here to do my job. If you want, I can call Mrs. Carter right now and confirm." For a brief moment, Harris hesitated. Then he shook his head, dismissing her suggestion. "Hand over your ID," he demanded, holding out his hand. Maya reached into her pocket, pulling out her driver's license. As she handed it to him, she noticed his grip tighten around it, almost as if he were trying to intimidate her. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. Arguing wouldn't help. All she wanted was to get inside and start working so she could leave this uncomfortable encounter behind. But Harris wasn't done. He stared at her ID for what felt like an eternity, flipping it over in his hands as though searching for something incriminating. Finally, he looked back at her, his jaw clenched. "Stay right there," he barked. "Don't move." Maya nodded silently, watching as he returned to his cruiser. She could see him speaking into the radio, likely running her information through the system. Though she hadn't done anything wrong, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. Something about the way he looked at her, the suspicion in his eyes, the dismissive tone of his voice, made her feel like she was already guilty in his mind. While she waited, Maya glanced around nervously. A few neighbors had started to emerge from their homes, curious about the commotion. Some stood on their porches, whispering among themselves. Others lingered near their mailboxes, pretending not to stare. Maya felt exposed, standing alone in the middle of this wealthy neighborhood with everyone's eyes on her. She wished Mrs. Carter would come home sooner rather than later. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. Maya's thoughts raced as she tried to figure out what to do next. Should she try reasoning with him again, call Mrs. Carter herself, or simply wait until the situation resolved itself? Whatever happened, one thing was certain. This was shaping up to be a very long morning. Officer Greg Harris stood leaning against his cruiser, his arms crossed and his sunglasses glinting in the sunlight. He flipped through Maya's driver's license once more, scrutinizing every detail as if it held some hidden clue to a crime she hadn't committed. Maya remained rooted in place, her hands clasped tightly around the handle of her cleaning bucket. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. Though she tried to keep her breathing steady, her nerves were getting the better of her. Finally, Harris looked up from the ID and strode back toward her with purposeful steps. His boots crunched against the gravel driveway, the sound unnervingly loud in the otherwise quiet neighborhood. "This says you live on Maple Street," he said sharply, pointing at the address printed on the card. "That's miles away from here. What are you doing all the way out in this part of town?" Maya swallowed hard but kept her voice calm. "I already told you, sir. I'm here to clean for Mrs. Carter. She hired me." Harris tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a skeptical smirk. "And how do I know that? For all I know, you could be casing the place. People like you—" He paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air before continuing. "Well, they've been known to take advantage of situations like this." The words stung worse than any slap. Maya felt heat rise to her cheeks, not just from embarrassment but from anger too. She clenched her jaw, determined not to let him see how much his insinuations affected her. "Sir, I'm just trying to do my job," she said firmly. "If you don't believe me, you can call Mrs. Carter yourself, or maybe check with your station to verify who I am. I have nothing to hide." But Harris wasn't interested in verifying anything. Instead, he reached for the handcuffs clipped to his belt. The metallic click as he unfastened them sent a chill down Maya's spine. "Turn around," he ordered, his tone icy and unyielding. "What? Why?" Maya asked, taking a step back instinctively. Her grip tightened on the bucket, her knuckles turning white. "I haven't done anything wrong. I said turn around," Harris barked, raising his voice now. His hand moved to rest on the holster of his gun, a clear warning that resistance would only make things worse. Panic surged through Maya's body, but she forced herself to stay still. Running wouldn't solve anything, it would only give him more reason to chase her. She set the bucket down carefully on the ground and slowly turned around, her mind racing. Was this really happening? Could he arrest her just because he didn't trust her word? As Harris began reciting Miranda rights, his tone flat and mechanical, Maya's frustration boiled over. "You're making a mistake," she exclaimed, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. "I'm telling you the truth. I'm supposed to be here." "Save it for the precinct," Harris snapped, pulling her arms behind her back. The cold metal of the cuffs bit into her wrists and she winced. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. Crying wouldn't help. She needed to think clearly, find a way to prove her innocence. Just then, a middle-aged woman walking her dog stopped nearby, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. "Is everything okay here, officer?" she called out hesitantly. Harris glanced at her briefly but didn't answer. Instead, he tightened his hold on Maya's arm and started guiding her toward the cruiser. "Mind your own business, ma'am," he muttered under his breath. The woman frowned, clearly uneasy, but didn't press further. Other neighbors continued to gather, whispering among themselves. Some pulled out their phones, recording the interaction. Maya caught snippets of their hushed conversations. "Do you think she's guilty? Why is he arresting her? Poor thing looks scared." Scared didn't even begin to cover it. Maya's mind was a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. How had her morning gone so terribly wrong? One minute she'd been ready to start another day of honest work, and the next she was being treated like a criminal, all because of the color of her skin and the assumptions someone had made about her. Before Harris could shove her into the back seat of the cruiser, Maya blurted out, "Please, just call Mrs. Carter. She'll tell you I'm telling the truth." For a split second, Harris hesitated. Then, with an exaggerated sigh, he pulled out his radio and muttered something into it. Maya couldn't hear what he said, but whatever it was, it didn't seem to bring her any relief. He shoved her into the car anyway, slamming the door shut behind her. Sitting in the cramped back seat, Maya felt suffocated. The windows were tinted, distorting the view outside. She could see people milling about, some staring openly at the police car while others pretended not to notice. A few kids rode by on bicycles, laughing and shouting, completely oblivious to the tension simmering in the air. It was surreal. Like she was trapped in some alternate reality where none of this should be happening. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Harris leaned against the hood of the cruiser, occasionally speaking into his radio or glancing at his phone. Each time he looked at her through the rear window, his expression grew darker, angrier. Maya wondered if he was receiving updates about her background check or lack thereof. Surely there wouldn't be anything incriminating. She'd always followed the rules, paid her taxes, stayed out of trouble. But she knew that wouldn't matter to someone like Harris. To him, she was already guilty. Then, without warning, the calm was shattered. A sleek silver sedan pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching loudly against the gravel. Out stepped Mrs. Evelyn Carter, a petite woman with neatly styled hair and a designer handbag slung over her shoulder. She froze mid-step, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. The police car, the handcuffed woman sitting in the back seat, and Officer Harris standing nearby. "What on earth is going on here?" Mrs. Carter demanded, her voice sharp and commanding. She marched straight up to Harris, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Who is that woman, and why are you detaining her?" Harris straightened up, suddenly looking less confident. "Ma'am, I found her loitering outside your property. She claims to be your cleaner, but I need to verify her identity first." Mrs. Carter's gaze shifted to Maya, recognition dawning immediately. "That's Maya," she exclaimed, pointing toward the cruiser. "She's my employee. I hired her to clean my house today. Why are you treating her like a criminal?" Harris opened his mouth to respond, but Mrs. Carter cut him off. "Unlock those cuffs right now," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. "This is ridiculous. You can't just arrest someone based on suspicion alone." Reluctantly, Harris unlocked the cruiser door and removed Maya's handcuffs. She rubbed her sore wrists, relief washing over her like a tidal wave. Still, the humiliation lingered. She avoided meeting Mrs. Carter's eyes, feeling exposed and vulnerable. "I'm so sorry, Maya," Mrs. Carter said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Maya nodded, though her throat felt too tight to speak. All she wanted to do was disappear, to go home, hug her children, and forget this nightmare ever happened. But the ordeal wasn't over yet. As Mrs. Carter confronted Harris, demanding answers and accountability, one of the neighbors approached timidly. "Excuse me, ma'am," the man said, holding up his phone. "I recorded everything. If you need evidence, I'm happy to share it." Mrs. Carter thanked him profusely, then turned back to Harris, her expression steely. "Officer, I suggest you explain yourself, and quickly, because if I have anything to say about it, this isn't going to end here." Harris's face reddened, his bravado crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. For the first time since their encounter began, Maya saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Whatever came next, she realized, would depend entirely on how far Mrs. Carter and the growing crowd of witnesses were willing to push for justice. The tension in the air was palpable as Mrs. Carter stood toe-to-toe with Officer Greg Harris, her voice cutting through the quiet neighborhood like a knife. She wasn't shouting. Her tone was calm but firm, each word laced with authority and indignation. "Officer Harris," she began, folding her arms across her chest. "You've just detained an innocent woman who happens to work for me. Care to explain why?" Harris shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado fading under the weight of scrutiny. He glanced around at the growing crowd of neighbors, many of whom now held their phones aloft, recording every second of the confrontation. Some whispered among themselves while others watched silently, their expressions ranging from disbelief to outright disapproval. The once quiet street had turned into a stage, and Harris was suddenly the main act. "I was following protocol, ma'am," he replied stiffly, though his voice lacked conviction. "There have been reports of suspicious activity in this area recently. I couldn't take any chances." Mrs. Carter raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Suspicious activity? You mean a black woman carrying cleaning supplies is considered suspicious now?" Her words carried a bite that made Harris flinch visibly. "Maya has done nothing wrong. She's here legally, at my invitation, and yet you treated her like a criminal. Do you even realize how inappropriate your actions are?" Before Harris could respond, another neighbor stepped forward. It was the same man who had offered to share his video footage earlier. "Excuse me, Mrs. Carter," he said politely, addressing her but glancing pointedly at Harris. "I recorded everything from when the officer arrived. If you need proof of what happened here today, I'm happy to provide it." "Thank you," Mrs. Carter said, nodding gratefully. Then, turning back to Harris, she added, "Looks like we won't have any trouble proving misconduct, will we, officer?" Harris's face flushed red, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool morning breeze. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words came out. Instead, he fidgeted with his radio, muttering something about contacting his superior. Whatever confidence he'd exuded earlier had evaporated completely. Meanwhile, Maya stood quietly off to the side, still clutching her bucket of cleaning supplies. Though relieved to be free from the cuffs, she felt drained, physically and emotionally. Every eye in the neighborhood seemed fixed on her, dissecting her presence, judging her worthiness to stand on this pristine street. She hated feeling so exposed, so vulnerable. But more than anything, she hated knowing that none of this would have happened if she looked different. If her skin were lighter, if her hair were straighter, if society didn't carry centuries of prejudice embedded in its bones. Mrs. Carter noticed Maya's discomfort and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's going to be okay," she murmured softly. "You don't deserve to be treated this way, and I promise you, we're not letting this slide." Maya nodded weakly, grateful for the support, but unsure whether justice would truly prevail. In her experience, people like Harris rarely faced consequences for their actions. They hid behind badges and uniforms, using authority as a shield against accountability. Still, seeing Mrs. Carter stand up for her gave Maya a small spark of hope, a reminder that not everyone turned a blind eye to injustice. Just then, a sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching against the gravel. Out stepped Captain Lewis, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He wore his uniform impeccably, every detail pressed and polished to perfection. As soon as he stepped out of the car, the atmosphere shifted. Even Harris seemed to shrink under the captain's piercing gaze. "What's going on here?" Captain Lewis demanded, his deep voice commanding immediate attention. His eyes swept over the scene, the police cruiser, the gathered crowd, and, finally, Maya, who stood quietly beside Mrs. Carter. "Harris, report," Harris stammered, struggling to piece together an explanation. "Sir, I responded to a potential trespassing call. This woman," he gestured vaguely toward Maya, "was loitering outside the property without clear authorization. I acted according to procedure. Captain Lewis frowned, his expression darkening. Procedure? Is that what you call pointing a gun at someone and throwing them in the back of your cruiser without proper cause? He turned to Mrs. Carter, his tone softening slightly. Ma'am, can you clarify what happened here? Mrs. Carter didn't hesitate. With clarity and precision, she recounted the events leading up to Harris's arrival. How Maya had been hired to clean her home, how Harris had approached her aggressively, and how he had refused to listen to reason despite Maya's repeated explanations. She emphasized the racial undertones of his behavior, noting how quickly he had assumed Maya was up to no good simply because of her appearance. As she spoke, Captain Lewis listened intently, his jaw tightening with each passing moment. When she finished, he turned back to Harris, his voice low and dangerous. Is this true? Did you draw your weapon on this woman without provocation? Harris hesitated, glancing nervously between his superior and the growing audience. Sir, I thought she might be involved in recent burglaries. That's not what I asked, Captain Lewis interrupted sharply. Did you or did you not escalate this situation unnecessarily? Because based on what I'm hearing and seeing, you let your biases dictate your actions instead of relying on facts. Harris opened his mouth to argue but thought better of it. Instead, he dropped his gaze, unable to meet the captain's eyes. For the first time, he looked less like a figure of authority and more like a man caught in the act of wrongdoing. Captain, Lewis sighed heavily, shaking his head in disappointment. Get in the car, Harris. We'll discuss this further at headquarters. Then, turning to Maya and Mrs. Carter, he added, I deeply apologize for this incident. Rest assured it will be investigated thoroughly, and appropriate action will be taken. Though his apology sounded sincere, Maya couldn't shake the lingering bitterness in her heart. An apology wouldn't erase the trauma of having a gun pointed at her or the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in broad daylight. Still, she appreciated the gesture, however small it might seem. As Harris slunk toward the passenger seat of the SUV, his shoulders hunched in defeat, Captain Lewis lingered for a moment longer. He addressed the crowd directly, his voice carrying across the street. Thank you all for stepping forward as witnesses. Your courage matters. Without accountability, there can be no trust, and trust is the foundation of our community. With that, he climbed into the driver's seat and drove away, leaving behind a stunned silence. The neighbors began to disperse slowly, some offering Maya encouraging smiles or murmured words of support. A few lingered longer, promising to send their videos to local news outlets or social media platforms to ensure the story gained traction. Mrs. Carter wrapped an arm around Maya's shoulders, guiding her gently toward the house. Come inside, she said kindly. You don't have to clean today if you don't feel up to it. But if you do want to work, I'll make sure you're comfortable and undisturbed. Maya hesitated, torn between gratitude and exhaustion. Cleaning had always been her escape, a way to focus on something tangible and productive. But after everything that had happened, the thought of scrubbing floors and wiping counters felt almost unbearable. Still, she forced a small smile. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. I think I'd like to try. As they walked into the house together, Maya couldn't help but glance back one last time at the driveway where the ordeal had unfolded. The memory of Harris's accusing glare and the cold metal of the handcuffs would haunt her for days to come. But amidst the pain, there was also a flicker of resolve. She realized that moments like these, painful and unjust though they were opportunities to shine a light on the systemic issues plaguing society. And if enough people stood together, refusing to stay silent, maybe, just maybe, change was possible. The days following the incident passed in a blur for Maya Johnson. While she tried to focus on her work and her children, the memory of that morning lingered like a shadow, creeping into her thoughts at unexpected moments. She replayed the scene, over and over in her mind, Officer Greg Harris's accusatory tone, the cold bite of the handcuffs around her wrists, the way the neighbors had watched her with a mix of curiosity and pity. It was hard to shake off the feeling of being judged, not just by Harris but by everyone who had witnessed what happened. But life didn't stop for reflection. Bills still needed to be paid, and her kids depended on her to keep things running smoothly. So Maya pushed forward, doing her best to compartmentalize the pain and frustration. Still, she couldn't ignore the growing buzz surrounding the incident. Word spread quickly, thanks to the videos shared by neighbors and Mrs. Carter's insistence on holding Harris accountable. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as yet another example of systemic racism within law enforcement. Social media exploded with hashtags like "Justice for Maya" and "You Accountability Now," drawing attention not only to her case but also to similar stories from across the country. At first, Maya avoided looking at any of it. The thought of seeing herself, her fear, her humiliation, splashed across screens made her stomach churn. But one evening, while scrolling through her phone during a rare quiet moment, she stumbled upon a post shared by Mrs. Carter. It was a heartfelt message accompanied by photos of Maya cleaning houses, along with a call to action urging people to support workers like her, who face discrimination daily. The caption read, "This is Maya Johnson, a hardworking mother, a dedicated employee, and an innocent woman who endured injustice because of someone else's prejudice. Let's stand together to demand change." Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as she scrolled through the comments. Hundreds of strangers had responded, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. Some shared their own experiences of racial profiling, while others expressed outrage at how Harris had treated her. For the first time since the incident, Maya felt something other than anger or sadness. She felt seen. People cared about what had happened to her, and they were using her story to amplify calls for reform. The next day, Maya received a call from Captain Lewis. His voice was somber but respectful as he explained the progress of the internal investigation. "Officer Harris has been placed on administrative leave pending further review," he said. "We're taking this matter very seriously, Ms. Johnson. Multiple complaints have been filed against him in the past, and your case has brought those issues to light." Maya listened silently, gripping the phone tightly. Part of her wanted to feel vindicated, to believe that justice was finally being served. But skepticism held her back. Over the years, she'd seen too many cases where officers walked away with little more than a slap on the wrist. Would this time be different? Captain Loss continued, sensing her hesitation. "I understand if you're skeptical, Ms. Johnson, but I want you to know that we're committed to accountability. This isn't just about one bad apple. It's about addressing the larger problem within our department. We've already scheduled mandatory bias training sessions for all officers, and we're reviewing protocols to prevent situations like yours from happening again." Though his words provided some comfort, Maya knew real change would take time and effort beyond empty promises. Still, she thanked him politely before hanging up. As she sat there staring at the wall, she realized she had a choice to make. She could retreat into herself, letting the trauma fester quietly, or she could use her experience to push for meaningful change. The decision wasn't easy, but deep down, she knew what she had to do. That weekend, Maya attended a community meeting, organized by local activists. The event was held in a small church hall, its wooden pews filled with residents eager to discuss police accountability and racial justice. When Maya walked in, escorted by Mrs. Carter, the room erupted into applause. At first, she felt overwhelmed, unsure of how to respond to such warmth. But as she took her seat near the front, listening to others share their stories, she began to feel a sense of belonging, a connection to people who understood her struggle. When it was her turn to speak, Maya hesitated. Public speaking wasn't her strong suit, and the idea of sharing her most vulnerable moment with a room full of strangers terrified her. But then she glanced at Mrs. Carter, who gave her an encouraging nod, and at the faces of the audience, many of whom looked hopeful and supportive. Taking a deep breath, Maya stood up and began to speak. "I never thought something like this would happen to me," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "I go to work every day, do my job, take care of my kids. I don't ask for much. All I want is to provide for my family and live peacefully. But that morning, I learned that peace isn't guaranteed. Not when you look like me." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd, prompting murmurs of agreement and nods of understanding. Emboldened, Maya continued, "What happened wasn't just about me. It was about all of us, about how society treats people based on the color of their skin. Officer Harris didn't see me as a person that day. He saw a stereotype, a threat. And until we address those biases, incidents like mine will keep happening." By the time she finished speaking, the room was silent except for the sound of sniffles and quiet sobs. People approached her afterward, shaking her hand and thanking her for her courage. One elderly woman hugged her tightly, whispering, "You're braver than you think, child. Keep fighting." In the weeks that followed, Maya became a reluctant but determined advocate for change. She spoke at rallies, participated in interviews, and collaborated with organizations working to combat racial profiling. Her story inspired others to come forward with their own experiences, creating a ripple effect that reached far beyond her small town. Even Mrs. Carter joined the cause, using her influence to lobby for policy reforms and fundraise for grassroots initiatives. Meanwhile, the fallout for Officer Harris continued. Internal investigations revealed a pattern of misconduct stretching back years, including multiple complaints of racial bias and excessive force. Though Harris attempted to defend himself, claiming he was simply doing his job, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Ultimately, he was fired from the police force and charged with abuse of power. The news sent shockwaves through the department, forcing higher-ups to confront long-standing issues they'd ignored for too long. Maya, watching Harris face consequences, was bittersweet. On one hand, she felt a sense of closure knowing he wouldn't be able to harm anyone else. On the other hand, she recognized that punishing one officer wasn't enough to dismantle the system that enabled his behavior in the first place. Real change required sustained effort, from lawmakers, community leaders, and ordinary citizens alike. As the months went by, Maya found solace in the knowledge that her voice mattered. Her story had sparked important conversations, inspired action, and reminded people of the power of standing together. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, she faced it with renewed strength and purpose. After all, she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her children, for future generations, and for everyone who deserved to live without fear of judgment based on the color of their skin. And so, Maya kept moving forward. One cleaned home, one shared story, and one step toward justice at a time. Months had passed since the incident, and life for Maya Johnson began to settle into a new rhythm. While the memory of that fateful morning still lingered in the corners of her mind, she found herself growing stronger with each passing day. The scars of humiliation and fear hadn't disappeared entirely, but they no longer consumed her. Instead, they fueled her determination to create a better future, not just for herself but for others who faced similar struggles. Maya's newfound role as an advocate brought unexpected challenges, but it also opened doors she never imagined possible. She became a regular speaker at community events, sharing her story with audiences ranging from local activists to national organizations. At first, public speaking terrified her, standing on stage under bright lights knowing hundreds of eyes were fixed on her. But with practice, she grew more confident. Her words resonated deeply because they came from a place of authenticity. She didn't sugarcoat her pain or downplay her anger. Instead, she spoke honestly about the realities of living as a Black woman in a society riddled with prejudice. One particularly memorable event took place at a large auditorium downtown. The theme was Breaking Barriers, Voices of Resilience, and Maya shared the stage with other individuals whose lives had been shaped by systemic injustice. As she waited backstage listening to the powerful speeches before hers, she felt a mix of nerves and excitement. When her turn came, she stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. For a moment, she stood frozen, taking in the sea of faces staring back at her. Then, clutching the microphone tightly, she began to speak. "I didn't choose this path," she admitted, her voice steady despite the weight of emotion behind her words. "If I'm being honest, I would have preferred to stay invisible, to keep my head down, work hard, and avoid trouble. But life doesn't always give us choices. Sometimes we're forced into situations that demand more of us than we think we can give. She paused, scanning the crowd. Many people nodded in agreement, their expressions filled with empathy and understanding. Encouraged, Maya continued, "What happened to me wasn't unique. It happens every single day, in grocery stores, on street corners, in schools, and yes, even in neighborhoods like mine. People are judged not by their actions, but by the color of their skin, the texture of their hair, the way they dress or speak. And while my story gained attention, there are countless others that go unheard." Her voice softened as she reflected on the impact of her advocacy. "I've learned that change starts with courage, with ordinary people deciding to stand up and say, 'Enough is enough.' I may not be able to fix everything, but if telling my story helps one person feel less alone, then it's worth it." The audience erupted into applause when she finished, many rising to their feet in admiration. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached her to express gratitude, share their own experiences, or simply thank her for inspiring them. One young girl, no older than 10, handed her a drawing of a superhero labeled Ms. Maya. Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as she hugged the child, realizing the profound effect her journey was having on others. Back home, Maya's efforts inspired those closest to her as well. Her children, though too young to fully grasp the complexities of her activism, noticed the pride in her step and the warmth of strangers greeting her wherever they went. They began asking questions about fairness and equality, sparking important conversations around the dinner table. Maya encouraged their curiosity, teaching them to value kindness, empathy, and resilience. She often reminded them, "The world may try to make you small, but you don't have to let it. Stand tall, speak your truth, and never forget your worth." Mrs. Evelyn Carter remained a steadfast ally throughout Maya's journey. Beyond supporting her publicly, Mrs. Carter used her resources and connections to amplify Maya's message. Together, they launched a scholarship fund aimed at helping minority students pursue careers in fields where representation was lacking: law enforcement reform, education, healthcare, and more. The initiative quickly gained traction, attracting donations from across the country. Seeing the tangible results of their collaboration filled Maya with hope. Change might be slow, but it was happening, one step at a time. Meanwhile, the fallout from Officer Greg Harris's misconduct continued to reverberate through the police department. His termination sent shockwaves not only among his colleagues, but also within the broader community. Some officers defended him, arguing that he was being unfairly singled out, while others acknowledged the long-overdue reckoning facing law enforcement. Captain Lewis, determined to rebuild trust, implemented sweeping reforms within the department. These included mandatory bias training programs, stricter oversight of officer conduct, and a civilian review board to investigate complaints against police personnel. Though these measures were met with cautious optimism, Maya understood that true transformation required sustained effort. She attended town hall meetings, offering feedback and holding officials accountable for promises made. Her presence served as a reminder that progress couldn't happen in isolation. It needed active participation from everyone involved. Months turned into a year. Maya reflected on how far she'd come. What began as a harrowing ordeal had evolved into a mission, a purpose larger than herself. She still faced moments of doubt, especially when confronted with reminders of the systemic injustices she fought against daily, yet she refused to let despair overshadow her resolve. Every small victory, a policy change, a supportive comment, a child smiling after hearing her story, reinforced her belief that change was possible. On the anniversary of the incident, Maya decided to mark the occasion in a meaningful way. She organized a community cleanup event in her neighborhood, inviting residents to join forces in beautifying shared spaces. Dozens of volunteers showed up, armed with gloves, trash bags, and paintbrushes. As they worked side by side, laughter and conversation bridged divides, fostering connections that transcended race, age, and background. At the end of the day, Maya gathered everyone in the park for a brief speech. Standing beneath the shade of a towering oak tree, she looked out at the diverse crowd and smiled. Today isn't just about cleaning streets or planting flowers, she said. It's about building something stronger, a community rooted in respect, compassion, and unity. If we can do that here, in our little corner of the world, imagine what we can achieve everywhere else. Applause broke out, echoing through the park as the sun dipped below the horizon. Maya felt a sense of peace wash over her, a quiet certainty that the seeds of change she'd planted were beginning to grow. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she walked it with renewed strength, knowing she wasn't alone. In the weeks and months that followed, Maya returned to her routine of cleaning homes, caring for her children, and advocating for justice. Life wasn't perfect. There were still days when frustration threatened to overwhelm her, but she faced each challenge with grace and determination. She carried with her the lessons she'd learned, that resilience could bloom even in the darkest times, that voices united were more powerful than silence, and that hope, though fragile, was worth fighting for. And so, Maya kept moving forward. One cleaned home, one shared story, and one act of courage at a time.